and thank you for joining our Teaching for 21st Century webinar brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang. I am your host, Annie Cyrus. Please use the Q&A box on your screen if you have any questions, and I promise we will answer them as soon as our very special guest presentation is over. With that being said, it is my privilege to introduce our speaker this evening, Jason Hill. He's a professor of philosophy at DePaul University in Chicago. Also, he's a Shellman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the author of the book, What Do White Americans Owe Black People? Racial Justice in the Age of Post-Oppression. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Annie. Nice to be here again with you.
It is always a pleasure to have you on. And as always, I'm excited to hear all your thoughts on this very, very important topic. So as always, floor is yours.
Well, yeah, I just finished today the last day of class for the fall semester, for the spring semester. And interestingly, I had 4 students among 2 classes that would normally have been filled with 40 students because there's still a continued boycott being led by the university against my classes because I am an advocate of Israel and I'm very pro-Israel, and I wrote this article a couple years ago defending the right of Israel to defend itself and its right to its territories. So it's interesting to be giving this talk at a time when I have had 4 students in 2 classes. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what I see as the end of education and as cultural nihilism by giving some personal anecdotes. I mean, I taught 2 classes last semester on the foundations of Western philosophy. And it's the first time in a long time that I really got a lot of pushback from my students who told me quite explicitly that they were not going to be reading Shakespeare. So I had a class that was canceled. That was a class on philosophy and neurobiology that the students complained was a class in white supremacist thought, and they were not going to take it. So apparently I was given a class on social justice. And I didn't know what to do with it because I don't teach activism and I don't teach social justice warriors. So I turned the class into a class on the foundations of Western philosophy, going back to the libraries of Alexandria and working our way through ancient Greece and the Hellenistic era and up through the scientific method, the Renaissance, and ending with the 19th century. And I assigned them a play by Shakespeare. And they told me point blank that they were not going to read Shakespeare because he was a white supremacist thinker, and that they would rather be reading the poetry of Jay-Z, the rapper Jay-Z. And if I was aware that Cambridge University had halved its courses on Shakespeare and was replacing them with the rapper Jay-Z, and that Homer was being canceled in America, that Shakespeare was being canceled in America, that I was being old-fashioned, and that these were white supremacist thinkers. And I said, what is it that you students want? And 3 of them said, we're going to bring down the system. We want to tear down the system because it's not working anymore. So I said, and what are you going to replace it with? Because evidently you are going to tear down the system using the language that is the language of the oppressor. And they said, in the immediacy of the moment, we will find new languages and new tools. I said, so you'll make up stuff, you'll make up your own language. You won't, use the language because the English language, they said, as was evidenced by Rutgers University that declared grammar as being racist, and the University of Chicago that said it was no longer going to introduce students into its doctoral programs unless they were committed to studying Black Lives Matter or social justice issues. So they admitted that the English language was racist. So I said, you're going to use some other kind of hybrid language. I said, yes, they would. So I started thinking about, the very nihilistic culture that we're living in, which is the destruction of values and the destruction of what exists. The belief, their nihilism has 2 meanings. One is the destruction of values because they are values, and the inclination to not believe in what exists when you know that it exists. And I started thinking about the roots of this nihilism. We see it all around us. And I think there are 2 threats. There are there are external threats to this nihilism and there are internal threats to this nihilism. So by my way of thinking, I want to talk about first very briefly the external threats. Most people don't realize the extent to which or K through 12 education is being funded by Saudi Arabia, by Qatar. I mean, I have some frightening figures here, which one of our Shillman Fellows, Raymond Ibrahim, has written extensively on this topic. But just very briefly, about the Qatar Foundation has dispersed about $30 million to US public schools to fund Arabic language programs. And what they do really under the guise of funding Arabic language programs is to indoctrinate these students into, whether it's coming from Qatar or whether it's coming from Saudi Arabia, into the ideology of radical Islam and into anti-Semitism. And so there are strings attached to these dollars. No, these are public funded, what I call government schools that are being funded by Qatar, which is the second to Iran, the largest sponsor of terrorism, and Saudi Arabia. And in our universities, we have $3 billion from the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar giving over $5 billion, and Saudi Arabia over $3 billion, and China $1.5 billion to our universities that are funding Middle Eastern programs. On the surface, there would seem to be nothing wrong with getting funding from outside countries, although that's quite problematic when there are ideological strings and ideological propagandistic motives and teachings affixed to them. So when we look at the external threats that are coming from without, and that the brainwashing and the propaganda that is coming with these fundings, that's one thing to be concerned with. And then we look at the internal funding and the internal backings of these nihilistic movements, from JP Morgan funding Black Lives Matter, which is an organization that's quite nefarious, that is it's anti-American, it's it's for the breaking up of all US banks, it's a Marxist organization. It readily admits in its charter that its founders are Marxist trained, and calls for the destruction of capitalism, calls for the destruction of the nuclear family, calls Israel an apartheid and apartheid state. And you have various organizations like JP Morgan, like a number of organizations giving it $100 million, $90 million to fund it, calling for the breakup of the entire law enforcement forces. But then going back to the 1960s with the development of what I call these revolutionary studies programs, whether they're Black studies, queer studies, women's studies, gender studies, Chicana studies, post-colonial studies, that were actually activist studies that were predicated on postmodernism, that gave birth to the rise also of critical race theory, which is a very nefarious, we're seeing the pushback against critical race theory, which among other things promulgates the idea that racism suffuses every single vector of life. That is the foundation. It questions the very foundations of our liberal order that includes equality theory, legal reasoning, the neutral principles of constitutional law, and Enlightenment rationalism. What we saw with these activists and these revolutionary studies, starting with Black studies, was an assault on the Enlightenment principles that are the backbone of the American Republic. What we saw with postmodernism, from which they gained their traction, was an assault on reason, logic, questioning the very foundation of the American Republic, and claiming quite vehemently from the 1960s that their goal was to overturn the foundational principles on which the United States was founded, the crucibles in which our republic was founded. And they had a very, very clever method of doing this by questioning reason and logic as being the constructs of white male European imperialists. So they start by criminalizing thought, reason, and logic, the means that we use to adjudicate among truth claims. And they substituted that with feelings. that feelings were the only way that we could use as criteria for determining who's right and who's wrong. And whoever had the largest voice, or who could scream the loudest, or who had a claim to a greater sense of victimology, would get to shape the narrative. So these revolutionary studies, these victim studies, these social warriors that started back in the 60s, was the beginning of what I call systemic nihilism, the destruction of the very values that have shaped the Republic. Because when you have a set of disciplines that are replacing real scholarship and real learning and using the university system as bastions of indoctrination centers, using the university system not as learning domains, but as indoctrination centers, criminalizing thought, penalizing, getting rid of the First Amendment, penalizing those individuals who deviate from orthodoxy, from received wisdom. And we see this today where free speech is being shut down by the left. Anyone who has a conservative viewpoint, anyone who deviates from the orthodoxy of left-wing ideology is thrown off of campus. This bargaining movement started in the 1960s, really. It started earlier, but it would be a different talk to talk about the Frankfurt School and to talk about the assault on modernity that predated the 1960s. So I think what happens also is when you have the collusion of big business, when you have the collusion of external foreign governments, and when you have today the collusion of the United States government colluding with Black Lives Matter, colluding with K through 12, something like ethnic studies in California, where they are now forcing children into something I would call Christophobia, forcing children to worship Aztec gods, to worship pagan gods, forcing children to engage in a set of very nefarious, what seems benign, but nefarious anti-racist programs in which white children are taught very early on that the color of their skin is an automatic crime. The possession of white skin is an automatic crime because they enjoy white privilege. And that the mere possession, they've taught this from K through 12, the mere possession of white skin allows them to harm those who don't have white skin and allows them to be participants in a membership club that is given the name white privilege. And that this privilege, in some sense, intrinsically and irrevocably ties them to a membership group that harms those who are not white. And that the only way, really, if you read the works of Ibram Kendi and Ta-Nehisi Coates, that they can, shall I say, solve the problem is to abolish whiteness, which really means, if you read between the lines, and you read not just between the lines, abolishing whiteness really means annihilation of the self. That is for white people to basically terminate themselves, self-annihilation. That's part of what I explain in my book, that behind the call for the abolition of whiteness, really, when you read these books and you read these studies very carefully, it's calling for the annihilation of whites from the planet. That's a form of nihilism, really. And so I think part of the solution, I'll wrap up briefly because I know we have questions. I think part of the solution really is for our federal government, which is certainly not going to happen under this administration, and alumni donors, is to defund our universities, is to stop backing these social sciences and these humanities, which are indoctrination centers, is to shut down our government schools, is to introduce what I call a new manifest destiny in our educational system, where we introduce an aristocracy of the soul, a complete new philosophy of education, where we go back to first principles, where we go back to a kind of elitism in the best sense of what elitism means, where the purpose of an education is to equip an individual to be a sovereign, autonomous, rational individual who can live a life in the universe and be in possession of his or her rational capabilities. That means that a lot of people who are in the universities today will not be allowed to be in the universities today, because what our universities are doing is they're producing enemies of the state. They're producing extremists who are out to destroy the republic. That's what our universities have become. They've become national security threats. And these national security threats need to be shut down. There's nothing wrong with having a plurality of viewpoints. When I teach the history of political thought, I have to teach Marx because he's part of that history, and I have to teach Ayn Rand and Hayek and von Mises and Hegel and Kant. But I teach them dispassionately as a scholar, and I allow students to critically assess the various viewpoints. That's not what is happening in our universities. We are taught, the students are being taught a radical Marxist left-wing ideology as the absolute truth. And the other side, the rejoinders, are not permitted to offer their viewpoints or to even critically assess the truth or falsity of the left-wing ideologies that they're being espoused. I have a lot more to say about the solutions that I have in mind, but I want to stop right now because I don't want to take up too much time because I want to, perhaps my solutions will come out in the questions that our listeners might have.
Well, I would love to hear all of your solutions because to be honest with you, every day I look around and I see what you're explaining. I'm a dropout. I used to go to Art Institute of California, Los Angeles, studying digital video production. At some point, I dropped out. Back then, it wasn't the whole teaching; it was rather pretty expensive for someone like me. But I watched the rest of my classmates who stayed, who graduated, who went from somewhat of a thinker. I'm not going to say they were all conservatives, but they were free thinkers. You know,
Yes.
they considered themselves artists. So, but I watched them in chunks, in majority, just gradually turn into these socialist Democrats by the time they were graduating. And interesting enough, as you said, for example, digital video production, we don't study his institute university. And a lot of people came, a lot of people that I was friends with. I used to go out, have a drink, and discuss politics with. It was like 180-degree change in their mentality. Probably by the time they graduated, they were maybe 25 to 28.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I hope that it does come out on questions, and if it doesn't, please Jason, don't hesitate to do put them out there because people like me, we feel a little hopeless. But I won't take too much time either. I'm going to start reading you the questions that are coming in. Here's the first one. Should parents simply stop sending their kids to college? And Dr. Hill always makes me feel good about being an American. So,
That's a very hard question. I think parents should start getting much, much more involved in the lives of their children's education. That is, I think parents have handed their children over to administrators and to faculty in good faith, entrusting their children to the administrators and the teachers, thinking that their children are going to receive, to use Fox's slogan, a fair and balanced education, not knowing that they are pawns in a system. So I don't want to say that, first of all, I think education in some sense is really over. But I think it can be salvaged if parents were to take a very, very active role and make it be clear that they're not going to withstand the kind of nonsense. We see it with the critical theory pushback that is happening in many schools, where parents are horrified and are pushing back and mobilizing and saying, no, we don't want critical theory being taught. We don't want a trans philosophy being imposed on our young children, not because we don't sympathize with people who suffer from gender dysphoria, which is a really serious ailment but it's a very, very, very tiny percentage of people who suffer from gender dysphoria. But we don't want this kind of ideology where 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds are being uh, taught that if they feel like they're of a different sex, then of then yes, you can switch your gender. So I would be very cautious to say pull your child out of university right away. I would say be very vocal, write to your administrators, pay more attention to what your child is being taught in school. And I can tell you something about administrators and faculty. They're cowards. They don't like confrontation. Um, they they really think that parents, and especially alumni donors, so if you can mobilize alumni donors, if you can get on the mailing list of alumni donors and really heckle the administrators, the provosts, the deans, especially the president, write and harass the president of your university, because the president is the fundraiser of a university. And because if your child really wants a college education and is really, set on it, things, I think we're in a position where things are in radical decline, but you'll be surprised at how much power you do have if you can really take an active role, as I am certainly doing, and pushing back against my own university and saying, I will not be bullied into silence. I will not shut up. Even if you give me 4 students, I am going to teach, and I will write for Front Page Magazine. I will appear on Tucker Carlson. I will appear on Laura Ingraham's show. I will appear on Newsmax. I traumatize these people every time I do so. But, so you have to just be very, very assertive.
I'm glad you. First of all, thank you. Don't stop. Do show up. Continue speaking out because we need your voice. But I'm glad you brought up the faculty because next question is actually asking how are faculty hiring and tenure decisions made? Should they be changed, or is there a bigger problem with university administrations?
Well, the tenure system is, I think, needs to be changed. I mean, the tenure system was a very good one because it was one that used to protect academic freedom, right? It was put in place so that a professor's viewpoint would not be punished and his or her scholarship would not be subject to the whims and the ideological prejudices of, let's say, the administrative bodies of a university. However, let's be clear, the majority of humanities and social science professors are Marxists, they're left-wing ideologues. The professoriate, they hate America so much that I think that it is time for the tenure system to be radically changed. And let me say that unless we see more conservative voices on faculty, unless there is more of an opening of let's just say a diversity of thought, intellectual diversity in the humanities and in the social sciences. I know there are a lot of conservative philosophers and political scientists and historians and sociologists who want to join the ranks of academia, but are scared stiff because they know they won't get tenure. Until that happens, the tenure system should probably be abolished. Because because the way that these decisions get made, I had a very nasty tenure battle 15 years ago when I came up because I'm a conservative independent and I didn't hold those radical, stupid, left-wing, postmodern ideas, right? And so I was punished. And it was only by the grace of the president of the university, who was a Roman Catholic priest, who was an old-fashioned scholar, who didn't have to believe in all of my ideas, but saw the strength of my scholarship, who overturned the votes and said, I'm going to give you tenure. And were it not for him, I would have been pushed out of academia.
Well, I'm going to read the next question in a second, but just a quick question for you, my question. What happened? Okay, what happened to freedom in general? Aren't universities supposed to follow our constitution? And doesn't our constitution gives freedom of expression and freedom of speech? Like I just don't get it. Where did this all go one way street into either leftist, communist, or nothing?
Well, the chickens have come home to roost. Like I said, it's been brewing since the 1960s, when these radical Marxists and these radical left-wing postmodernists had as their agenda to really bring down the republic, to destroy West. Let's be clear, their goal is to destroy Western civilization. These Marxists, these global Marxists are out for a takeover. I mean, if you think that the jihadists who want to establish a global caliphate are bad, they're bad. But the left-wing ideologists on our campuses want, they can call it whatever they want, democratic socialism like Alexander Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie Sanders. They want a global takeover. The only way they can do that is to shut down free speech. The only way they can do that is to criminalize thought. They cannot advance their causes if they're going to have critics who stand up and say, wait. How are you going to do this without taxing and expropriating the labor of the talented 1% on whose shoulders the rest of society, right? They can't do this. And somehow they have allowed, or somehow the administrative bodies, the provosts, the presidents, and the deans have who are also part of that movement, have joined forces. They're all part of this left-wing faction. They've joined forces with the faculty and now brainwash the students from K through 12, because it starts from K through 12 really, into a movement that has coalesced into questioning. When my students ask me, why is it that we just don't get rid of the Constitution? Why is it? And I said, where are you getting this stuff from? Well, they don't teach civics anymore. So yeah, from K through 12. Why is the First Amendment important? Not even the Second Amendment. I mean, I can deal with the Second Amendment, although I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. But the First Amendment, so free speech is something for the privileged, and we're not privileged. We're marginalized and we're oppressed. And language is oppressive, they say, the way that language is used. So we need to get rid of free speech. It's really, really pernicious, and it's really dangerous, and it's going to get worse.
I understand and I get it, but I just wish when it started back in the 60s, American people would push back before it gets this bad to where we have to fight back. But here's the next question for you from Stephen Mix saying, I have also been thinking that shutting down all public school is a great solution. But are they too integrated into the job market? And also, is homeschooling workable on a larger scale, being colleges or universities?
Right. So I think, and I've written about this in the pages of Front Page, in Front Page magazine, that giving tax credits to parents to homeschool their children, giving tax vouchers is one solution. Promoting charter schools, look, I think abolishing the government schools is part of the way to go. This is not going to happen under this administration, unfortunately. But I think thinking long term, yes, getting rid of those government schools that are propaganda machines, more homeschooling, and also voting for public officials who will not tax either that part of income that is used towards sending children to charter schools, or not taxing at all, or I would say abolishing the income tax. I would advocate abolishing the income tax. I mean, it's abolished in Las Vegas. It's abolished in others, in Tennessee, I think. So, I mean, I think when we abolish certain taxes, we leave certain incomes available for people to make better choices about where they want their children educated. Right now, people are radically restricted in where they can send their children to be educated, and they have very, very few choices. I think homeschooling is one such choice. I think the religious schools, a lot of the private schools, the secular private schools, are as woke and as corrupt as they come. I think a safe haven is a lot of the parochial religious schools are still holding ground, and I do think homeschooling is one such measure.
Agreed. Okay, here is the next comment and question. Dr. Hill, thank you for this presentation. Would you say that the critical race theorist actually denies the true lived experience of the individual, i.e., the person, because the theorist requires the individual to fit into their depersonalizing reductionist ideology, and if they don't, they are stripped of their personhood. And that
Yeah,
question was by Ian.
thank you so much for that. This is the irony of it, that critical race theorist attempts to advocate what it calls standpoint epistemology, that each individual person's experience counts, and it's your lived subjectivity that really matters. Yeah, that counts only if you are a critical race theory espousing or promulgating the ideology of critical race theory. If you are a cisgendered white male, or in my case, a mixed race Black man from the Caribbean who holds conservative viewpoints, and I'm not supposed to be the kind of person who holds those sorts of viewpoints. I don't check the boxes, right? So my lived experience as a conservative Black man from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, my lived experience doesn't count. So they completely eviscerate people of their lived experiences. Because why? Because those persons are part of, in their view, an oppressive um, group of individuals who constitute um, a group that would seek to exercise power and jurisdiction over the lives of the critical theorist adherents. So yeah, you're dead on. I mean, if you're not part of the critical theorist squad, your personal agency and your personal subjectivity really don't matter. Quite the opposite. It is part of the problem that has to be eradicated, that has to be got rid of, that has to be not just questioned, but has to be sort of annihilated from the earth, um, in no uncertain terms, or at least silenced through depriving you your First Amendment rights.
Very true. Next comment and question is from Tom. Tom said, you should have lots of graduate students and fill up your profession with your own academic dissidents. Now, the question is, would it make a difference if more kids lived at home and commuted to college and university?
No, because I think that I've seen this phenomenon. I think most students, after a certain point, their socialization takes place primarily under the ages of their peers. I think the real, to really answer this question seriously, I'm going to sound a little bit radical. I think the real solution is to start homeschooling your child from the minute that it leaves the womb. To exercise the kind of, and I used to not be an advocate of homeschooling, believe it or not. I used to say that it's claustrophobic, it is too, but this is not the case, because of course you homeschool your child is going to be a member of other groups, your child is going to play sports and socialize with kids in the neighborhood. But I think things have gotten so horribly polluted and necrotic in our educational system that you've got to really exercise some kind of jurisdiction and impart your value system and your values. There's nothing wrong with that. Why is it okay for the universities and for the public schools to impart, the government really, the state, to impart its values to your child, but it's not okay for you to impart and socialize your child primarily under your value system? I mean, nobody really asks those questions. You send your child to public school, it's indoctrinated by a far left system, and that's okay. But to homeschool your child and impart your values, whatever those values might be, to your child, there's something wrong with that. So no, I don't know that the commuting system work, because actually most of my students at my university live in the suburbs and they commute, but they're very rebellious against their parents. They think that their parents, they're at the age now where they think that their parents are stupid, that they know better than their parents, that their parents let them down, that I see a lot of anger. This is another thing about the nihilism. I see a lot of, whereas I was very respectful towards my mother and my grandmother, and I looked to my mother and my grandmother for a lot of wisdom guidance because they were older people. And even, after I left home, I would talk to my grandmother at 72 and 75 and in her 80s, and I would say, Grandma, what did you think about this? And what do you think about that? These kids are just completely disrespectful. This Generation Z, disrespectful of any kind of authority, any kind of wisdom. It's old fashioned. They're mired in a shallow present that they want the Hunger Games to take the place of Shakespeare, because the Hunger Games is where it's at. And the lyrics of Jay-Z, that filthy mouth rapper, has more wisdom and more psychological insight than the timeless wisdom of Shakespeare, Euripides, and Homer. So I don't know that really the commuting thing is going to work, because that presupposes that the parents have a lot of control. I think the parents can exercise a lot more control over the universities and what the universities are teaching them. And that's where the control really needs to be exercised over the curriculum, and really interfering in the curriculum. I would really like more parents to get involved in looking really at what their children are being taught. They're going to be shocked, especially in the K through 12 system.
I'm glad you closed it on that because I'm going to read a question from the chat. This one is from Michael. He is asking, what can we do now to begin eliminating this divisive ideologies from the curriculum? Activist and grievance studies destroy the cohesion in our society. What do you think about having universities co-sign on a student loans so they would be forced to deliver something constructive to their students if they want the loans repaid?
That's an interesting idea. I haven't thought about that. I just think that they would find a way to screw the students over.
Well, wait a minute. They're going to forgive all student loans, so who cares?
No, they're not. Oh, the government? No, they're not. They're not.
I know, but isn't that what everybody's talking about? And they voted because they want millions and billions of student loans all forgiven.
Here's what I would think. Here's what I'm more of an advocate of. I'm more of an advocate of the students suing the universities for giving them a useless diploma in the first place. But I say that sort of tongue in cheek because students also have to sort of exercise some kind of autonomy. I mean, why are you like really majoring in gender studies and women's studies? Why are you majoring in like Black studies? Why are you majoring in post-colonial studies? Like, what's your motivation for majoring in these fake, stupid disciplines that are not tethered to anything robust? They're all about squalling, screaming victims living in Western society. There's no real scholarship there. So if you're majoring in one of these fake disciplines and you can't get a job, I mean, you really shouldn't be suing the university. Your parents really are the ones that should be reprimanded for financing a degree. I think that we are in an interregnum period, really, where education as we know it is completely over. And we've got to start thinking about looking at places like Hillsdale College, Pepperdine University. There's a new university called Ralston College in Savannah, Georgia. There are going to be emerging universities that will, this is the capitalist society, this is America. There are people who are going to come up with a better mousetrap. There is also a hunger. There is a hunger among students, old-fashioned students with old-fashioned sensibilities who want an old-fashioned education. And I think my heart goes out to those students who are trapped in this mess. But I think in the long, I would say to them, what I say to those students is get your college degree. Don't waste your time arguing with these left-wing professors. Graduate and get the hell out as quickly as you can. I mean, don't sacrifice your dignity. And when you hear nonsense being spewed, politely challenge it, but don't get into these protracted debates with your professors too much where you're going to hurt your grade. Study hard, get your degree, and get the hell out of the university as quickly as you can. But I think in the long run, we are going to see new kinds of academies coming up. If I could get the funding, I certainly would start my own academy. It's something, I would love to do. I know other people are doing it. And I think in the long run, we are going to see a serious backlash. I don't think Western civilization, I believe in this country. This is a great unprecedented republic of ours. And I believe in the American people. And I really believe that the American people have been hoodwinked. And there used to be a saying, hell hath no fear than a woman scorned. It's almost sexist to say that, no. But I would want to say that hell hath no fewer than American people who have been hoodwinked into thinking that their children who are educated are being abused cognitively. And I think once there's a sufficient groundswell, a critical mass of people who realize that their children through K through 12 are being brainwashed into something that is so anti-American, so mean-spirited, that there's going to be I can't predict the future, but I think there's going to be a critical mass, a mass awakening, and we're going to see a flourishing of new kinds of academies coming up for those people who want to go back to first principles, who want to go back to the old-fashioned foundations on which our country, our great republic was built. But it's going to take time. It's really going to take a lot of time, because I think a lot of people, and this is the thing I cannot wrap my head around, I must say to our listeners and to you, a lot of people, when I speak, just don't believe that things are as badly as I'm making them out to be. And then when they hear about a friend of mine whose son, who's white, is forced to put his hand beside a brown paper bag in a Zoom class, and the teacher says to him, I think I wrote about this in front page, his teacher says to the class, if your skin color is different from the brown paper bag, you're part of the systemic problem, and it's called white privilege, and you've harmed all the black children in that class. And my friend, who's a far left liberal who believes in public schools, just slammed the computer down. He said to me, Jason, I couldn't believe it. My son, who's white, I don't know where this brown paper bag came from, but he put his hand beside the brown paper bag, and the teacher basically said, if your skin color is different from the brown paper bag, you're part of it. You're an existential threat to this country. You're part of the problem. When parents realize, and COVID-19 has been a really, really rude awakening for parents who are at home seeing what their children are being taught. When parents, and I said to him, I said, your child is going to grow up being a racist, because he's being told that he's guilty. He's an innocent sixth grader who has never harmed a black person. And he's being told that he's harming black people. The school is turning him into a white supremacist, a white racist, when all he wants to do is play with his little black and Hispanic children in this public school. I think when enough parents see the kind of evil that their children are being exposed to and are being taught, things are going to change. But unfortunately, because Americans by nature are, I think, good-willed and have a sort of naive benevolence. I don't mean this to sound condescending, but a sort of naive benevolence that they believe in the goodwill of other people, that they couldn't imagine that educators and teachers would have such ill will towards innocent children. But when they realize that this is really what's taking place in our educational system, there's going to be hell to pay. There's going to be a serious backlash in this country.
Um, Let me go ahead and read the good news first, and then I would like to make a comment about the disturbing situation you just explained. Now, back to what you were saying about thinking of, opening your own old school Western value school. We have a comment here from Mary. Said, I am interested in starting a small private liberal arts 6 to 12 school based on traditional Western values. What is the best way to reach you? For some advice on this initiative. Also, do you do public speaking? Because I would be interested in having you come to my daughter's school and talk to parents and teachers here in the Chicago suburbs.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, I do a lot of public speaking. And so you can reach me through my, it's, I don't want to give you my university email, but so I'll spell it out to you. My email is, my first name is Jason, Jason. My middle name is Damian, Damian, Hill, Hill, at gmail.com. So Jason Damian Hill at gmail.com. And, or you can also visit my website, which is jasondamianhill.com. And my email address is there. And yeah, I'll be happy to correspond with you. So Jason Damian, Damian Hill at gmail.com, or jasondamianhill.com, which is my website, which has all my email information. And yeah, I get a lot of letters from people who, every time I write my articles on the front page, I end up spending about 2 hours because I respond to every single email. It's just that part of, I'm an old fashioned writer who thinks I have to respond to my. So yes, I'd love to talk to you.
Now, I know we are almost out of time and I have more questions, but I just want to put this out there for our audience who are very well aware. But it is as bad, or maybe even worse, than Jason is saying. I can tell you, coming from where I come from, being Islamic Republic of Iran, I went to school there. And trust me, 9 out of 10 of us ended up growing up being those jihadis you hear about and see on TV.
Mm-hmm.
All of us were born innocent children, but some of us ended up giving into the brainwash of hating anyone and anything that does not represent Islam. And
Mm-hmm.
those people grew up to be the jihadis that blow us up. So, yes, there is a very good chance that the leftists can definitely turn your innocent children into anything that you think is monstrous out there and could never happen to you. I can testify that it's very doable. So, any of you who can write an email to Jason and get him a speaking engagement or even possibility of a sponsorship or funding, please do it because we need to save our children, the future generation, and ourselves, whatever is left of our life. Sorry for that little rant there.
Oh no, I'm so glad that you brought the personal experience in, because the conversion of these young minds happens like that.
But that's the thing. Where do you think all of these jihadis? They weren't born jihadis.
No, there were sweet little
Somebody turned
babies,
them.
sweet little babies at one time.
Exactly.
Innocent, completely innocent.
Agreed. Okay, back to let's try to squeeze as many questions as we can in the next 7 minutes. Um, Mary also asked, do you think our country is headed for a civil war or a national divorce? I don't see how we can come together. Your thoughts on the next few years of our country?
Oh boy. Unless we can find a figure in the next, and I do not see it happening under this administration. I'm an independent conservative. I don't think we're going to have a civil war. Why? Because I think that we as Americans, I've lived in America for 35 years. I think we as Americans are beyond the pale of that kind of barbarity. I think we're going to become much more divisive and a lot more hostile in certain in our public orientations and in our disagreements, but I don't think we're heading towards civil war. I mean, I think so long as those of us who believe in the greatness of this country stop being apologists for American exceptionalism, stop apologizing for Western values, So long as we just continue enforcing and asserting the supremacy of the Enlightenment values, the Republican values of this country, I think that is our best antidote. I really don't think we're heading for a civil war. I can't permit myself to think that way. One of the things that upsets me greatly is this movement to defund the police and to dismantle the police. I think that could lead to a civil war. And I think if I will fight with every iota of my being, every strength that I have. The police are not, police force is not innocent. And no, so what? I mean, academia, lawyers, doctors, you find corrupt people in every institution. But this idea of dismantling the police force, I think we need to back our law enforcement 100%, pay them more money because they're overworked. They're the ones who really enforce the law. And if we continue with this nonsense of dismantling the police force, the law enforcement force, that could lead to a civil war, because there are enough crazy people out there on many sides who are just angling for incivility. But I don't think we're going to a civil war. I think we are going to. I think we will find a way. I think we will find a way. I have to believe that. I'm an eternal optimist.
I will 100% agree with you. We are fighting an info war. We don't need to go to civil war. We need to get educated.
Yes.
Get educated. Have the correct information so they can misinform you, and you have it made.
That's right. That's right.
On that note, the next person, Mix, is asking or saying, I don't hear as much these days about MOOC, massively online open courses, as competition against the Public Indoctrination Center, otherwise known as public schools. Did the MOOC movement just die off, or what happened to
it? I think it's just a perception in people's mind about what counts as pedigree and what counts as a tool to upward social mobility, really. And that's something that we probably should have more of a conversation about. I mean, I'm a great advocate of vocational schools, and the custodian in my building earns a very, very decent salary. I love him to death. He's from Poland, and he keeps my condo. I own a condo in a high rise, and he went to trade school and earns a 6-figure salary. And so I think to answer the question is that it's just, again, we have a kind of narrative that is dedicated to seeing upward social mobility as being tracked through the college or through a certain kind of educational navigation. And we need to have multiple conversations about, first of all, talented students making their ways through different educational models. I have a lot of boys in my class who should not be in college. They should be under the hood of a car. They're so bright, they're so brilliant. And the problem that we have, and I've been a professor for 25 years, and I think the reason that a lot of my students have loved me in the past is because I've said to students, you are brilliant. You don't write really great papers, but there's no single metric. There's no one algorithm to measure intelligence. You are a brilliant person with your hands, and you're a brilliant person. You should be a woodcutter. You should be making furniture. You're so brilliant with your visual. You are brilliant visually and spatially in a way that I'm just like a dummy. I mean, and so we have to have a way of recognizing different domains of intelligence among our young people, instead of sort of like having these stupid single track methods of measuring intelligence and wasting talent. There are just a lot of talented people that we could be utilizing their talents. So this is a sort of circuitous way of answering the question. I just think that sort of model is not seen as prestigious as other models, really.
Last question for you, Jason. I know you already said it, but I have to ask again. Where do our audience go to get more educated on the topics that you are informing us on. And if they want to get in touch, invite you for speaking engagement or any of that. Where do we go again?
Well, really, it's, front page is my go-to place where I write most of my articles, and they can. I mean, the new book that's coming out, "What Do White Americans Owe Black People," is um, a new book that's coming out in October. "We Have Overcome: An Immigrant's Letter to the American People" is a book where I've spelled out in detail some of the educational foibles that I have witnessed in the classroom. That's a great book to buy to sort of to see where our educational system is and how much the professoriate hate America, and how I, as a professor, have managed to sort of, after 25 years of being in the classroom, still withstood the brutalities leveled against me and have made my way through. This wonderful presentation has given me incentive to sort of, I have 31 pages here of solutions that I'm going to, Jamie, my editor, as you know, the wonderful Jamie Glazov, limits me to 1,500 words. So I might, so I might do a 2-part or a 3-part series about solutions to everything that I've talked about, because we've talked about a lot of problems, and I'm like a guy, I like to fix things and I like to provide solutions. And I do have a lot of solutions, which we haven't really gotten to. So I'll be writing about this in the future on front page, about cultural nihilism, and working with Jamie about producing maybe a series of solutions to this nihilism, and more importantly, the rot that is at the core of our educational system from K through 12 all the way to university, and what the new university would look like, and what Americans can do to help foster in a new educational ethos and a new set of university systems. So look forward to that. And if you don't see them forthcoming, email me and say, Jason, where are the articles? But they will be forthcoming, I promise you. I have more articles than I can manage to write. So, yeah.
Well, I know myself and everyone who was with us right now and will watch this video later, we do appreciate your hard work, your articles, your information, especially the time you dedicated to us today to come on this webinar and answer our questions. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And to our lovely audience who has stayed with us until now, we also appreciate you very much. Remember, all these webinars are brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and the Glazov Gang for free. So if you'd like to support these webinars, all you got to do is go to frontpagemag.com and consider making a 100% tax deductible donation. With that being said, remember, Americans and proud, stay safe and goodbye.